Sometimes the people with the least give the most. Sometimes a single moment of kindness can change everything. On the coldest night of the year, a homeless man named Marcus saw a little girl shivering alone at a bus stop. Her mother was nowhere in sight, and the child was freezing. Without thinking twice, Marcus took off his only coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You're safe now," he told her gently. What Marcus didn't know was that this little girl's mother was Victoria Sterling, one of the richest women in America. Victoria had been searching frantically for her daughter, who had wandered away from their luxury hotel. When she finally found Emma wrapped in a stranger's coat, she learned something that would shake her to her core. A man who had nothing had given up everything to keep her child warm. Would this act of pure kindness teach a billionaire what wealth really means? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Williams adjusted the collar of his worn coat against the December wind that cut through downtown Chicago like a blade. The fabric had seen better years, decades, really, but it still held warmth, and that was all that mattered. He'd been living on these streets for 3 years now, ever since the medical bills from Sarah's cancer treatment had taken everything they'd owned. Their little house in Evanston, their savings, their dreams of retirement hall, of it gone to pay for treatments that hadn't saved her anyway. But Marcus didn't think about that tonight. He thought about the hot meal waiting for him at the Salvation Army mission 6 blocks away, and the warm cot in the men's shelter where he'd been staying since the temperatures dropped below freezing. At 62, his body felt every degree of this brutal Chicago winter, but his spirit remained unbroken. He'd been a high school English teacher for 35 years before his world fell apart. He taught thousands of students about empathy, about the power of literature to reveal the human heart. Now he lived those lessons every day on the street. The mission served dinner until 8 o'clock, and Marcus had learned to time his arrival perfectly. Too early, and he'd spend unnecessary time in the cold waiting. Too late, and the best portions would be gone. He developed a routine in his new life, small rhythms that gave structure to days that could otherwise feel endless. Morning coffee at the McDonald's on State Street, where the manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, always slipped him an extra sugar packet with a knowing smile. Afternoons at the public library, reading newspapers and keeping warm. Evenings at the mission, then back to the shelter. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was a life. And Marcus had learned something profound in these 3 years of having nothing. When you lose everything material, you discover what's truly valuable. Kindness from strangers, the warmth of human connection, the simple pleasure of a hot meal shared with others who understood struggle. Meanwhile, 47 floors above the street, Victoria Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, looking down at the city lights without really seeing them. The photo on her mahogany desk, a family portrait from happier times, sat beneath a stack of quarterly reports, its silver frame collecting dust. In the picture, she and Emma were laughing together at Navy Pier, cotton candy sticky on their fingers, the Chicago skyline bright behind them. That had been 2 years ago, before the divorce, before she'd thrown herself completely into rebuilding Sterling Enterprises after her father's sudden death. Victor Sterling had built this empire from nothing, starting with a single construction contract in 1965 and growing it into a multinational corporation worth $8 billion. He taught Victoria that emotions were weaknesses, that sentiment was a luxury successful people couldn't afford. Business is war, he used to say, adjusting his tie in the mirror of his study. And in war, the strongest survive. Victoria had taken those lessons to heart, perhaps too well. She'd been ruthless in the boardroom, brilliant in negotiations, and completely focused on growth and profit. Sterling Enterprises had never been more successful than it was under her leadership. But somewhere along the way, She'd forgotten how to be a mother to Emma. The divorce from David had been brutal but necessary. He'd wanted her to slow down, to choose family over empire. He couldn't understand that the company wasn't just her legacy, it was her identity. When the custody agreement was finalized, Emma spent weekdays with David in their suburban home and weekends with Victoria in the penthouse. It was a compromise that satisfied the lawyers, but left an 8-year-old girl feeling like a stranger. In both places, tonight, Emma was supposed to be at the Palmer House Hotel with Mrs. Chun, her nanny, while Victoria finished preparing for tomorrow's board meeting. Sterling Enterprises was negotiating the largest acquisition in its history, a European construction firm that would double their international presence. The paperwork alone filled 3 bankers' boxes, and Victoria had been working 18-hour days for 2 weeks straight. Her assistant, Jennifer, knocked on the doorframe. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm heading home. Is there anything else you need?" Victoria glanced at her Cartier watch. 8:30. "No, thank you, Jennifer. Get some rest." "Ma'am?" "Don't forget Emma has that school presentation on Friday. Something about heroes in literature?" Victoria's fingers paused over her keyboard. She'd completely forgotten. Emma had mentioned it weeks ago. Something about dressing up as a character from a book and giving a short speech. In her old life, before Sterling Enterprises consumed everything, she would have helped Emma choose a costume, maybe even sewn something together on her ancient Singer sewing machine. "I'll remember," she said, though they both knew Jennifer would. Have to add it to her calendar and send 3 reminders. After Jennifer left, Victoria walked to the window again. The city stretched out below her like a circuit board, all lights and movement and energy. Somewhere down there, Emma was hopefully asleep in the hotel suite, safe and warm. They'd have breakfast together in the morning before Victoria's first meeting. Maybe they could talk about the school presentation then. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. When had it become so hard to connect with her own daughter? When had work become easier than motherhood? David used to say she was hiding behind Sterling Enterprises, using the company as an excuse to avoid the messy, complicated emotions of family life. But he didn't understand the weight of responsibility she carried. Thousands of employees depended on Sterling Enterprises for their livelihoods. Shareholders trusted her with their investments. Her father's legacy rested in her hands. The phone on her desk rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed the Palmer House. "Mrs. Sterling?" Mrs. Chun's voice was tight with panic. "Emma is missing." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. "What do you mean, missing?" Mrs. Chun's voice cracked with distress. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Sterling. She was reading in the suite, and I went to make her some tea. When I came back, the door was open and she was gone. I've searched the entire hotel. Security is looking everywhere, but..." Victoria was already grabbing her coat, her mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. How long ago? 20 minutes, maybe 30. "I called you as soon as I realized." "Call the police. Now, I'm on my way." Victoria's hand shook as she pressed the elevator button. 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, anything could happen to an 8-year-old girl alone in downtown Chicago. The city that looked so beautiful from her office window suddenly seemed full of dangerous traffic. Strangers, the bitter cold that could kill. The elevator seemed to take forever. Victoria's reflection stared back at her from the polished steel. There was a woman in an expensive suit who'd forgotten how to be a mother when it mattered most. She thought about David's words during their last argument. "You love that company more than you love your own daughter." She denied it then, called him jealous and small-minded. Now, standing in this elevator racing toward her worst nightmare, she wondered if he'd been right. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chun. "Security checking cameras. Police on the way." The Palmer House lobby was chaos when Victoria arrived. Hotel security guards spoke in hushed, urgent tones while checking their radios. Mrs. Chun sat in a leather chair near the concierge desk, her face streaked with tears. "Tell me exactly what happened," Victoria said, fighting to keep her voice steady. She seemed upset about something. "I asked if she wanted to call you, but she said you were too busy. She went to her room to read while I prepared her evening snack. When I knocked on her door 15 minutes later, she didn't answer. The door was unlocked and she was gone." Detective Sarah Martinez arrived within 10 minutes, a woman about Victoria's age with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Mrs. Sterling, I need to ask you some difficult questions." They went through everything: Emma's state of mind, any recent changes in behavior, whether she might have tried to reach her father. Victoria felt each question like an accusation. She didn't know if Emma had been upset lately because she'd been working 16-hour days. She didn't know if her daughter had been having nightmares because Mrs. Chun handled bedtime routines. She didn't know her own child well enough to guess where she might go when she felt lost and alone. "Has Emma ever wandered off before?" Detective Martinez asked. "No, never. She's always been responsible, mature for her age." Too mature, Victoria realized now. Emma had learned to take care of herself because her mother was always too busy to do it. The hotel security guard approached with a tablet showing grainy footage from the lobby cameras. "We found her leaving through the main entrance at 8:47 p.m. She's wearing a white coat and carrying what looks like a small backpack." Victoria's heart clenched as she watched the footage. Emma looked so small walking through the massive lobby, her shoulders set with determination that was heartbreaking in someone so young. She walked straight to the revolving doors like she knew exactly where she was going. "Any idea where she might head?" the detective asked. Victoria tried to think like an 8-year-old, but she realized with growing horror that she didn't know her daughter's mind well enough. Where would Emma feel safe? Who would she trust? Maybe the library? She loves to read. Or, she paused, remembering something Emma had said weeks ago. She mentioned wanting to see the Christmas lights downtown. She asked if we could walk around and look at the decorations. When was this? Last weekend. I told her maybe later, after the acquisition was finalized. Another promise broken. Another moment of connection missed. Detective Martinez dispatched units to check the public library and the shopping district where the Christmas lights were brightest. Victoria called David, her ex-husband, who was 3 hours away visiting his mother in Wisconsin. "She didn't call me," David said, his voice heavy with worry. "But Victoria, she's been asking about you constantly lately, wondering why you work so much, whether you still love her." The words cut deep. "Of course, I love her. I know you do. But does she know it?" Victoria ended the call feeling like she was drowning. She'd built an empire, but lost her daughter. She'd conquered boardrooms, but failed at the most important job she'd ever had done. At 9:23 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Mommy?" Emma's voice was small and scared. "Emma, baby, where are you? Are you okay? I'm at a bus stop. I was trying to come see you at your office, but I got lost. It's really cold, Mommy." Victoria's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Tell me what you see around you. Any street signs or store names?" "There's a big church across the street, and a sign that says State Street. Stay right where you are, sweetheart. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming to get you right now." Victoria ran from the hotel, her heels clicking against the frozen sidewalk as she searched frantically for her daughter. State Street stretched for miles, dotted with bus stops and churches. Which one? Which corner? She called Emma back, but the phone went straight to voicemail. The battery must have died. The panic rose in Victoria's chest like a tide. Somewhere in this vast, cold city, her little girl was alone and scared, waiting for a mother who had failed her in every way that mattered. Marcus had been walking toward the mission when he saw her, a small figure huddled at the bus stop on State Street, her white coat bright against the dark night. At first, he thought she might be waiting for a late bus, but as he got closer, he could see she was shivering violently. Her small hands pressed against her mouth as she tried to warm them with her breath. Thought no child should be alone on a night like this. The temperature had dropped to 12 degrees, and the wind made it feel even colder. Marcus had seen grown men struggle with this kind of cold. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. "Hey there, sweetheart. You okay?" Emma looked up at him with wide brown eyes filled with tears. She was beautiful in the way only children could be, innocent and trusting despite her fear. "I'm waiting for my mommy," she said through chattering teeth. "She's coming to get me." Marcus knelt down to her level, his joints protesting in the cold. Up close, he could see that her coat, while expensive looking, wasn't warm enough for weather like this. Her lips had a slight blue tinge that worried him. "That's good, honey. Mommy's always come. But you're mighty cold while you're waiting." He looked around at the empty street. No traffic, no other pedestrians, just the two of them in the bitter night. "Where'd you last talk to your mommy?" "A few minutes ago. My phone died, but she knows where I am." Emma's voice was small and brave, trying to convince herself as much as him. Thought Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Without hesitation, he shrugged out of his old coat, the only barrier he had against the cold that could kill him, and gently wrapped it around Emma's shoulders. The coat was far too big for her, but it was warm from his body heat, and he could see the relief in her face as the warmth surrounded her. "There you go, little one. That's better." Emma looked up at him with wonder. "But now you'll be cold." Marcus smiled, even as the wind hit his thin sweater and seemed to cut right through to his bones. "Don't you worry about me. I'm tough as old leather. But you're delicate as a flower, and flowers need protection from the cold." "Are you?" "Sure. I'm sure. Your mommy's coming for you, and when she gets here, she's going to find you safe and warm. That's what matters." Emma pulled the coat tighter around herself. It smelled like soap and something else kindness, if kindness had a scent. "What's your name?" "Marcus. What's yours?" "Emma. Emma Sterling." The name meant nothing to Marcus, but he filed it away anyway. "That's a beautiful name. Like Emma from that book by Jane Austen. You ever read that one?" Emma shook her head, but she was listening intently. "Well, Emma in that story was very smart and very kind, just like you. She cared about people and tried to help them, even when it was hard." They sat together on the cold bench, Marcus fighting to keep his teeth from chattering as the brutal wind cut through his sweater. He told Emma stories to keep her mind off the cold, and the fierce stories about brave princesses and kind dragons, about heroes who weren't always the strongest, but were always the most caring. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Marcus was starting to worry about both of them. His fingers were going numb, and even with his coat, Emma was still shivering. Where was this child's mother? "Tell me about your mommy," he said, trying to keep his voice steady as the cold settled deeper into his bones. "She works a lot," Emma sighed quietly. "She has a big office with windows that go all the way to the ceiling. She's very important." "I bet she is. And I bet she loves you very much." "Sometimes I think she loves her work more than me." The words came out in a rush, as if Emma had been holding them in for a long time. Marcus felt his heart break a little. He'd seen this before, back when he was teaching children who had everything material but were starving for attention and love. "Oh, honey, mommies have a funny way of showing love sometimes. They work hard because they want to take care of us, but sometimes they forget that the best way to take care of someone is just to be with them. She never has time to read with me anymore, and she forgot about my school presentation." "What's your presentation about?" "Heroes in literature. I'm supposed to dress up like a hero from a book and talk about what makes them special." Marcus smiled despite the cold that was now making his whole body ache. And who did you choose? I don't know yet. I wanted to ask Mommy to help me pick, but she's always in meetings. Well, if I were picking, I'd choose someone like Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. Do you know that story? Emma shook her head. He was a father who stood up for what was right, even when it was hard, even when other people didn't understand. He protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Marcus paused, looking at this small girl wrapped in his coat. But you know what? Real heroes aren't just in books. They're all around us. Sometimes they're teachers or firefighters or doctors. Sometimes they're just regular people who see someone who needs help and decide to do something about it. In the distance, they could hear the sound of running footsteps on the frozen sidewalk. Someone was calling Emma's name. "That's my mommy." Emma jumped up, Marcus's coat billowing around her like a cape. Victoria Sterling appeared around the corner, her face wild with panic and relief. She was more beautiful than Marcus had expected, tall and elegant even in her distress, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that were now filled with tears. "Emma!" Victoria ran to her daughter and dropped to her knees, pulling the child into her arms. "Oh my God, baby, I was so scared. Are you hurt? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mommy. This is Marcus. He kept me warm and told me stories about heroes." Victoria looked up at Marcus for the first time, really seeing him, a man in his 60s wearing only a thin sweater in 12-degree weather, his face drawn with cold, but his eyes kind and gentle. "You gave her your coat," Victoria said, and her voice broke on the words. "She needed it more than I did," Marcus said simply. And in that moment, Victoria Sterling, who had built an empire, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals, who had never met a problem she couldn't solve with money or power, understood that she was looking at something she had never encountered before. True wealth. Victoria stood slowly, her arms still wrapped around Emma, unable to take her eyes off Marcus. He was shivering now, his body finally betraying the toll the cold had taken on him. His lips had a blue tinge, and she could see his hands shaking as he tried to warm them by rubbing them together. "You're freezing," she said, stating the obvious, because she couldn't find words for what she was feeling. Here was a man who had literally nothing, and he had given his only protection to her daughter without a moment's hesitation. "I'll be fine," Marcus said, though his voice was tight with cold. "The mission's not far. I was heading there anyway." "The mission?" "Salvation Army. They serve dinner until 8 and let folks like me warm up for a while." Victoria glanced at her watch. It was past 9:30, but they're closed now. Marcus shrugged, a gesture that seemed to cost him effort. "There's always somewhere. The overnight shelter opens at 10. In this cold, you could die walking there. People like me have been surviving Chicago winters for a long time, ma'am. We know how to take care of ourselves." But Victoria could see that Marcus was far from fine. His whole body was rigid with cold, and each breath came out in sharp puffs of vapor. She made a decision that surprised even her. "No, absolutely not. You saved my daughter's life tonight. The least I can do is make sure you don't freeze to death." She looked around at the empty street, then back at Marcus. "My car is parked at the Palmer House. Come with us, please." Marcus hesitated. "That's very kind, ma'am, but I don't want to impose." "Impose?" Victoria's voice rose slightly. "You gave up your coat for a stranger's child, in weather that could kill you. You sat with her in the cold and told her stories to keep her from being scared. And you think offering you a warm meal is an imposition?" Emma looked up at Marcus with her big brown eyes. "Please come with us, Marcus. I want to show you my book about dragons." Something in the child's voice seemed to reach him. Marcus nodded slowly. "All right, just until I warm up a little." The walk back to the Palmer House was surreal for all of them. Victoria kept one arm around Emma and stayed close to Marcus, worried he might collapse from the cold. She'd called off the police search and dismissed the security team, but Detective Martinez was waiting in the lobby when they arrived. "Emma Sterling, I presume?" the detective said with a warm smile. "Your mother's been very worried about you." "I'm sorry," Emma said quietly. "I just wanted to see Mommy at her office, but I got lost." Detective Martinez knelt down to Emma's level. "It's okay, honey. But next time you feel like going somewhere, you ask a grown-up to help you, all right? Chicago can be a big, confusing place." Emma nodded solemnly, then looked at Marcus. "Detective Martinez, this is Marcus. He's a hero. He gave me his coat so I wouldn't be cold." The detective looked at Marcus with new interest, taking in his worn clothes and obvious signs of homelessness. Then she looked at Victoria, raising an eyebrow in a silent question. "Marcus is coming upstairs with us," Victoria said firmly. "He needs to warm up before he goes anywhere else." The hotel manager, Mr. Peterson, approached them with the kind of polished concern that expensive hotels specialized in. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm so relieved Emma is safe. Is there anything else we can do for you tonight?" "Yes, I need a room for our friend Marcus. Something comfortable, with room service available." Mr. Peterson's smile flickered almost imperceptibly as he took in Marcus's appearance, but his professionalism held. "Of course, ma'am. I'll arrange something immediately." Marcus started to protest. "Mrs. Sterling, that's not necessary." "It absolutely is necessary." Victoria's voice had the same steel that made her formidable in boardrooms. "And please, call me Victoria." 30 minutes later, they were in Victoria's suite on the 42nd floor. Marcus sat in a leather armchair by the window, wrapped in a hotel bathrobe, while his clothes dried in the bathroom. His color was slowly returning to normal as the warmth of the room seeped into his bones. Emma had changed into her pajamas and was curled up on the sofa next to Marcus, showing him her favorite book, a beautifully illustrated collection of fairy tales. She was chattering away about dragons and princesses, more animated than Victoria had seen her in months. Victoria ordered room service for all of them, soup and sandwiches, hot chocolate for Emma, coffee for herself and Marcus. As they waited for the food to arrive, she found herself studying this man who had turned her world upside down with a single act of kindness. "Emma told me you used to be a teacher," she said. Marcus nodded. "High school English. 35 years. At Lincoln Park High School." "What happened?" Marcus's expression grew distant. "My wife got sick. Cancer. The treatments were expensive, and our insurance only covered so much. I took out loans against the house, sold everything we had. In the end, it wasn't enough to save her, but it was enough to cost us everything else." Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "I'm so sorry. Sarah was a good woman. The best. She would have loved meeting Emma tonight." Marcus smiled at Emma, who had fallen asleep against his arm, the book open in her lap. "She always said that children were our best hope for the future. They haven't learned to be cynical yet. They still believe in heroes and happy endings. Do you have children of your own?" "We tried for years. It just wasn't meant to be, I guess. But I had thousands of students over the years. Taught them about literature and life and the importance of treating each other with kindness." Marcus paused, looking out at the city lights. "Funny how life works out. I spent all those years teaching kids about heroes in books, and tonight I got to meet a real one. A real hero?" Marcus looked down at Emma sleeping peacefully beside him. This little girl walked away from luxury and safety because she wanted to see her mother. She was scared and cold and lost, but she was brave enough to call for help when she needed it. And when a complete stranger offered her kindness, she accepted it with grace. That takes courage. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. "She ran away because I haven't been paying attention to her. Because I've been so focused on work that I forgot how to be her mother. Being a parent is the hardest job in the world. Marcus said gently, especially when you're trying to balance it with everything else. But you dropped everything tonight when she needed you. You ran through the streets of Chicago in freezing weather to find her. That's what love looks like. Room service arrived, and Victoria gently woke Emma. They ate together in comfortable silence, the warmth of the room and the food gradually erasing the trauma of the evening. Emma insisted on sitting between Marcus and Victoria, chattering about school and books and her upcoming presentation. "I think I know what hero I want to write about now," Emma announced, looking at Marcus with adoring eyes. "Who's that, sweetheart?" Victoria asked Marcus. "He's better than any hero in a book because he's real." Victoria watched Marcus's face transform with emotion, and she understood something fundamental about the man who had saved her daughter. He had been broken by loss and circumstances, but his heart remained intact. His capacity for love and sacrifice hadn't diminished despite everything he'd suffered. Later, after Emma had fallen asleep again, and Marcus had reluctantly agreed to stay in the hotel room Victoria had arranged for him, Victoria stood alone in her suite, looking out at the city. Everything looked different now. The lights below weren't just markers of commerce and success. They were homes where people lived and loved and struggled and triumphed. Somewhere out there were thousands of people like Marcus, invisible to those who had never learned to really see. She thought about her father's lessons about strength and weakness, about the walls she'd built around her heart to protect herself in the ruthless world of business. Those walls had kept her safe, but they'd also kept out the very things that made life worth living. Tomorrow, she would still be the CEO of Sterling Enterprises. She would still have board meetings and acquisitions and profit margins to worry about, but something fundamental had shifted tonight. A homeless man had given her daughter his coat, and in doing so, he had given Victoria something she didn't even know she'd lost: the understanding that true wealth had nothing to do with money. Victoria woke before dawn, her mind already racing with plans. She barely slept, her thoughts consumed by Marcus and Emma, and the realization that her life had been fundamentally incomplete. She made coffee in the suite's kitchen and stood at the window, watching the city wake up early commuters bundled against the cold, street vendors setting up their carts, the endless rhythm of urban life. At 7 o'clock, she knocked softly on the door, connecting to Emma's room. Her daughter was awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed in her pajamas, drawing in a notebook. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" Emma looked up with bright eyes. "I'm drawing Marcus for my hero presentation." "Look." She held up the notebook, showing a crayon drawing of a man in a big coat standing next to a small girl at a bus stop. Above them, she'd drawn stars and the words, "Real Hero," in careful 8-year-old handwriting. Victoria sat on the bed beside her daughter, studying the drawing. "It's beautiful, Emma. Tell me about your presentation." "I have to dress up like my hero and give a speech about what makes them special. Mrs. Patterson said we could pick someone from a book or someone real. Most kids are picking Superman or Wonder Woman, but I want to talk about Marcus. What will you say about him?" Emma's face grew serious, and Victoria was struck again by how mature her daughter seemed. "I'll say that real heroes don't have superpowers. They just see someone who needs help, and they help them, even when it's hard, even when they don't have very much to give." Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotion. "That's very wise, Emma. Mommy, can we see Marcus today? I want to give him this picture. I think that's a wonderful idea. But first, let's have breakfast together. Just the two of us." They ordered room service and ate at the small table by the window, talking more than they had in months. Emma told Victoria about school, about her friends, about the book she was reading. Victoria found herself really listening, not checking her phone or thinking about work, just focusing completely on her daughter's words. "I miss this," Emma said quietly as she finished her pancakes. "What do you mean?" "Talking to you. Being with you when you're not thinking about work." Victoria felt a stab of guilt and sadness. "I've been working too much, haven't I?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Daddy says you love your job more than us." "Oh, Emma." Victoria reached across the table and took her daughter's small hand. "That's not true. I love you more than anything in the world. More than any job or any company. I've just been confused about how to show it. You showed it last night, when you ran through the cold to find me." "Yes, but I should have been showing it every day before that. I should have been reading with you and helping you with your presentation and just spending time together. Can we do that now?" "Yes, starting right now." At 9 o'clock, Victoria called the front desk to check on Marcus. Mr. Peterson informed her that their guest had been up early, had breakfast in the hotel restaurant, and was currently in the business center using the computers. They found Marcus in the small business center off the lobby, dressed in his own clothes, now clean and pressed thanks to the hotel's laundry service. He was typing on one of the computers, his reading glasses perched on his nose, completely absorbed in whatever he was working on. "Marcus!" Emma ran to him, clutching her drawing. He looked up with a smile that transformed his entire face. "Well, good morning, little hero. How did you sleep?" "Really good. Look what I made for you." Emma thrust the drawing at him proudly. Marcus studied the picture with the seriousness it deserved, his eyes growing soft. "Emma, this is beautiful. Is this from your presentation?" "Yes. I'm going to tell everyone about how you're a real hero." "I'm honored, sweetheart. But you know, the real hero in this story is you. You were brave enough to ask for help when you needed it, and brave enough to accept kindness from a stranger." Victoria watched this exchange with wonder. Marcus had a gift with children that reminded her of her own father before business had hardened him. But where her father had been demanding and critical, Marcus was gentle and encouraging. "What are you working on?" Victoria asked, gesturing to the computer. "Job applications, mostly. Updating my resume. I figured since I'm clean and warm and have access to the internet, I should try to get back on my feet." Marcus gestured to the screen, which showed a job search website. "There are some openings for substitute teachers in the district. It's not much, but it's a start." Victoria felt something shift in her chest, an idea forming, fragile and important. "Marcus, can I ask you something? What would you do if money wasn't an issue? If you could have any job, any life you wanted?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering the question seriously. "I'd teach again. Full-time, not just substituting. There's something magical about watching a young person discover the power of literature, the way a good story can change how they see the world." He paused, looking at Emma. "I'd want to work with kids who need extra encouragement. The ones who don't have stable homes or much support. Help them see that education can be their way to a better life." "And where would you live?" "Somewhere with a little garden, maybe." Sarah always wanted a garden. She used to say that growing things was like raising children. You plant seeds of possibility and tend them with love and patience. Marcus's voice grew wistful. "A small place where I could have my books, maybe a cat. Nothing fancy. Just a home." Emma had been listening intently. "That sounds nice, Marcus. Everyone should have a home." Victoria made her decision. "Marcus, I have a proposition for you." He looked at her warily. "Mrs. Sterling, Victoria, I appreciate everything you've done, but I can't accept charity." "This isn't charity. This is business." Victoria's voice took on the authoritative tone she used in negotiations, but her eyes were warm. "Sterling Enterprises has a foundation that supports education initiatives. We've been looking for someone to head up a new program for at-risk youth combining literacy education with mentorship. The salary would be competitive, and it would come with benefits, including housing assistance." Marcus stared at her. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you the chance to do what you love while making a real difference in kids' lives." The program would be based here in Chicago, working with schools in underserved communities. You'd design the curriculum, hire teachers, Work directly with students. It's exactly what you described, using education to give kids hope for their futures. But I've been homeless for 3 years. I don't have references. You have 35 years of teaching experience and a master's degree in English literature. More importantly, you have something money can't buy: genuine compassion and the ability to see potential in people others might overlook. Victoria paused. The same qualities you showed Emma last night. Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve. Please say yes, Marcus. Then you can help lots of kids be heroes like you helped me. Marcus looked between Victoria and Emma, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Why are you doing this? Victoria considered how to answer. The simple truth was too complex for words. That this man had shown her daughter more genuine care in 30 minutes than she'd managed in months of expensive gifts and hurried conversations. That he'd reminded her what truly mattered in life. That he'd given her a glimpse of the person she used to be before ambition and grief had hardened her heart. Because Emma's right, she said finally. You are a hero. And heroes shouldn't have to sleep in shelters or worry about their next meal. They should be out there changing the world. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the computer screen without seeing it. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Sarah used to say that life has a way of bringing people together when they need each other most. I thought she was being overly optimistic, but maybe. He looked at Emma, then at Victoria. Yes, I'd be honored to accept your offer. Emma whooped with joy and threw her arms around Marcus. Victoria felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she watched them embrace. She'd made thousands of business decisions in her career, but none had ever felt as right as this one. There's one condition, Victoria said when Emma finally released Marcus. You let me help you find a proper place to live. Something with a garden. Marcus smiled through his own tears. I think Sarah would like that very much. As they left the business center together, Victoria's phone buzzed with texts from her assistant about the morning's board meeting. For the first time in years, she ignored them. There would always be another meeting, another deal, another crisis that seemed urgent in the moment. But there would never be another chance to build this bridge with her daughter, or to help a good man rebuild his life. They spent the morning shopping for Marcus' new clothes, toiletries, the basic necessities of a life being reconstructed. Emma insisted on picking out a warm winter coat for him, a thick navy blue wool coat that was nothing like his old threadbare jacket, but served the same essential purpose: protection against the cold world. At lunch, as they sat in a quiet restaurant, sharing stories and laughter, Victoria realized something profound had happened. She'd spent 3 years building walls around her heart after her father's death and her divorce, convincing herself that emotional distance was strength. But watching Marcus interact with Emma, patient, kind, genuinely interested in her thoughts and dreams, she understood that real strength came from opening your heart, not closing it. The Sterling Enterprises Foundation meeting that afternoon felt different than any business meeting Victoria had ever conducted. Instead of focusing solely on profit margins and tax benefits, she found herself thinking about impact, about the children whose lives could be changed by having someone like Marcus believe in them. The literacy program will start small, she explained to the foundation board. 1 school, 20 students, with the potential to expand based on results. Our program director will work directly with teachers and families to create a comprehensive support system. Board member Janet Reeves raised an eyebrow. This sounds more like social work than education. Education is social work, Victoria replied firmly. We can't separate learning from living. Children need to feel safe and valued before they can reach their potential. It was something Marcus had said during their lunch conversation, and hearing herself repeat it, Victoria realized how much her perspective had already changed. 24 hours ago, she would have focused on measurable outcomes and cost-effectiveness. Now she was talking about feelings and potential, concepts that couldn't be quantified in spreadsheets, but were infinitely more valuable. 2 weeks later, Victoria found herself in a place she'd never expected to be, the principal's office at Emma's school. Not because her daughter was in trouble, but because she was there to watch Emma's hero presentation. The third grade classroom was decorated with colorful posters of various heroes: Superman, Wonder Woman, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks. Victoria sat in a tiny plastic chair designed for 8-year-olds, feeling slightly ridiculous in her business suit, but happier than she'd been in years. Emma stood at the front of the class, wearing Marcus's old coat, the threadbare jacket he'd given her that night at the bus stop. Victoria had it cleaned and mended, and Emma had insisted on wearing it as her costume. She looked tiny inside the oversized coat, but her voice was clear and confident. "My hero isn't in any book," Emma began, "but he taught me what real heroes are like. His name is Marcus Williams, and he used to be a teacher before bad things happened to him. Now he's a teacher again, helping kids like me learn about books and stories and how to be brave." Emma held up the drawing she'd made at the hotel. "This is Marcus giving me his coat when I was cold and scared. He didn't have very much, but he gave me what he had because he saw that I needed help. That's what heroes do. They help people, even when it's hard." Victoria glanced around the classroom and saw that the other parents and children were listening intently. Even Mrs. Patterson, Emma's teacher, had tears in her eyes. "Heroes don't need superpowers," Emma continued. "They just need big hearts. Marcus has the biggest heart of anyone I know. He sees good things in people even when they can't see good things in themselves. He makes you feel special just by listening to you." Emma's presentation lasted only 5 minutes, but Victoria knew she would remember every word for the rest of her life. When her daughter finished, the entire classroom erupted in applause. Several parents approached Victoria afterward, wanting to know more about Marcus and the literacy program Sterling Enterprises was launching. "Your daughter is remarkable," said Mrs. Patterson as the other families filed out. "I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've never heard a presentation that moved me quite like that one. She really understands what heroism means." "She learned it from Marcus," Victoria replied. "He's been teaching both of us what's really important in life." That afternoon, Victoria drove to the small apartment she'd helped Marcus find on the north side of Chicago. It was nothing fancy, a 1-bedroom place in a converted brownstone, but it had everything he dreamed of: built-in bookshelves, good natural light, and a small back garden where he was already planning to plant vegetables in the spring. She found him in the garden despite the December cold, sketching out ideas for raised beds and thinking about what Sarah would have wanted to grow. He'd gained weight in the past 2 weeks. His face had filled out, and the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by something Victoria could only describe as hope. "How did Emma's presentation go?" he asked, looking up from his notebook. "See for yourself." Victoria showed him the video she'd taken on her phone. Marcus watched in silence, his face cycling through a dozen emotions. When Emma held up the drawing and talked about his big heart, he had to wipe his eyes with the back of his hand. "She's going to change the world someday," he said quietly. "She already has. She changed mine." They sat together on the small back steps, watching the sun set over the city. Marcus had started his new job the week before, working with 20 third graders at Roosevelt Elementary, a school in one of Chicago's most challenging neighborhoods. The kids adored him already. Victoria had visited twice and seen how they lit up when he walked into the classroom. "How are things going with the program?" Victoria asked. "Better than I ever imagined. These kids are so hungry to learn, to have someone believe in them. Yesterday, a little boy named Jamal told me he wants to be a teacher when he grows up because teachers are heroes who help kids become smarter." Marcus smiled. When I asked him why he thought that, he said, "Because that's what you do for us, Mr. Marcus." Victoria felt that familiar tightness in her chest, the feeling she'd been experiencing more and more lately when confronted with the simple power of human connection. "I have some news about the program. The school board wants to expand it to 5 more schools next year. And there's interest from districts in Milwaukee and Detroit." Marcus stared at her. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious." "What you're doing works, Marcus. The test scores are already improving, but more importantly, the teachers say they can see a difference in the kids' confidence and engagement. You're giving them something they've never had before, the belief that they matter. It's not just me. It's the whole approach treating education as more than just academics. These kids need to know someone cares about them as human beings, not just as test scores." Victoria nodded. She'd learned that lesson herself over the past 2 weeks, spending real time with Emma instead of just checking items off a parenting to-do list. They've been reading together every night, working on Emma's upcoming school projects, talking about everything from books to feelings to dreams for the future. "David called me yesterday," Victoria said, referring to her ex-husband. "He wanted to thank me." "For what?" "For whatever I've been doing differently with Emma. He said she's happier than she's been since the divorce. More confident, more talkative about her life. She told him about you, about how you taught her that heroes come in all forms." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You know, when I lost everything 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I couldn't see any purpose in continuing. The only thing that kept me going was the thought that maybe, somehow, I could still make a difference in someone's life. You've made a difference in dozens of lives already. Emma, the kids at Roosevelt Elementary, even me, you've changed all of us. You've changed too, you know? Emma talks about you constantly when we have our tutoring sessions. How you're reading with her now. How you helped her pick out books for her room. How you actually listen when she talks about school." Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I'm learning. You and Emma have been teaching me that success isn't just about building companies or making money. It's about building relationships, making connections that matter." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell around them. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the city traffic and sirens and the general hum of millions of people living their lives. But in this small garden behind a modest apartment, there was peace. "Victoria?" Marcus said eventually. "Yes? Thank you. Not just for the job or the apartment or any of the material things. Thank you for seeing me as a human being when I couldn't see it myself. Thank you for giving me the chance to matter again." Victoria reached over and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for reminding me what love looks like. Real love, the kind that gives without expecting anything in return." As she drove home that night, Victoria thought about the changes in her life over the past 2 weeks. She was still the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, still responsible for thousands of employees and billions in revenue. But she'd restructured her schedule to have dinner with Emma 3 nights a week. She'd started reading again, not just business reports, but actual books that fed her soul. She'd even called her own estranged sister in California, beginning to rebuild a relationship that had been damaged by years of mutual neglect. The Sterling Enterprises acquisition was still moving forward, but Victoria had insisted on new terms that included better benefits for the European workers and a commitment to environmental sustainability. The board had grumbled about the additional costs, but Victoria had stood firm. Some things she'd learned were more important than maximum profit. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mommy, Marcus is helping me pick books for our reading time tomorrow. He says there's a story about a girl who plants a garden that feeds her whole neighborhood. Can we plant a garden too?" Victoria smiled as she typed back, "Yes, sweetheart. We can plant anything you want." Outside her car windows, Chicago sparkled in the winter night. And for the first time in years, Victoria Sterling felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 3 months had passed since that cold December night, and Victoria's life had settled into a rhythm she'd never known before, one that included regular dinners with Emma, weekend visits to Marcus's garden, and a growing sense that she was finally living instead of just working. The literacy program had expanded to 3 schools, with Marcus traveling between them like a modern-day Johnny Appleseed, planting seeds of hope in children who had never known they could grow. Victoria often stopped by unannounced, watching from classroom doorways as he worked his quiet magic with kids who reminded her more and more of Emma, hungry for attention, desperate to matter to someone. It was on a bright March afternoon that everything changed. Victoria was in her office reviewing applications for the program's summer extension when Jennifer knocked on her doorframe. "Mrs. Sterling, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's about Marcus Williams. Send him in." The man who entered her office was elderly, perhaps in his 70s, with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, and his expensive suit suggested wealth, but there was something fragile about him, as though he carried some invisible burden. "Mrs. Sterling, my name is Robert Hayes. I apologize for coming without an appointment, but I needed to speak with you about Marcus Williams." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please, sit. Are you familiar with our literacy program?" "In a way, yes, Mrs. Sterling. I've been searching for Marcus for over 30 years. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. 30 years? I'm sorry. I don't understand. Robert Hayes reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents. "Mrs. Sterling, Marcus Williams is my son." Victoria stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "That's impossible. Marcus never mentioned having family. He said he and his wife couldn't have children. He doesn't know about me." Robert's voice was heavy with decades of regret. "I gave him up for adoption when he was 3 days old. I was 19, unmarried, and my father threatened to disown me if I kept the baby. I was young and scared and stupid, and I made the worst decision of my life." Victoria's mind reeled. "You gave up your son?" "I gave up everything that mattered." Robert opened the folder and spread photographs across Victoria's desk. "I've been looking for him ever since I turned 25 and realized what I'd thrown away. It took me decades to find the right adoption agency, to track down the family that raised him. By the time I found the Williamses, Marcus's adoptive parents, they had died, and Marcus had disappeared into the foster system." Victoria picked up one of the photographs. It showed a young man who looked remarkably like Marcus, standing next to a woman holding a baby. "This is you?" "Me and Marcus's mother, Linda. She died in a car accident when Marcus was 6 months old. I was so devastated, so overwhelmed by being a single father, that I convinced myself I was doing the right thing by giving him to a family who could take better care of him. The Williamses? Good people. They loved him, gave him opportunities I never could have provided at 19. Marcus became a teacher, married a wonderful woman, built a life I was proud of even from a distance." Robert's voice cracked. "I followed his career, through newspaper articles about his teaching awards, his students' achievements. I never approached him because I didn't want to disrupt his happiness." Victoria studied the man across from her, seeing Marcus in the shape of his eyes, the set of his shoulders. "What changed?" "I hired a private investigator 3 years ago to do a wellness check. I wanted to know that Marcus was okay, that he was happy in his retirement." Robert's hand shook as he reached for another document. "Instead, I learned that his wife had died, that he'd lost his home, that he was living on the streets." The magnitude of what Robert was telling her began to sink in. "You've known he was homeless for 3 years?" "I've been trying to find him ever since." "Do you know how hard it is to locate someone who has no fixed address, no credit cards, no digital footprint?" I hired the best investigators money could buy, but Marcus had simply vanished into the invisible population of people society doesn't see. Victoria thought about Marcus those first weeks after she'd met him. How he'd seemed almost surprised by her attention, as though he'd grown accustomed to being overlooked. How did you find him now? The newspaper article about the literacy program. There was a photograph of Marcus with his students, and I recognized him immediately. Robert's eyes filled with tears. My son, helping children the way I should have helped him. Victoria stood and walked to her window, trying to process this information. Below, the city hummed with its usual energy, but everything felt different now. Marcus had a father, a wealthy father, who had been searching for him for decades. Mr. Hayes, what do you want from me? I want to see my son. I want to apologize for the choices I made 40 years ago. I want to know if there's any chance he might forgive an old man who threw away the most precious thing in his life. Have you considered that Marcus might not want to see you? That learning about you might cause him more pain? Robert Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Every day for 30 years. But Mrs. Sterling, I'm 74 years old. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, houses in 3 countries, a successful business empire, and none of it means anything because I don't have the one thing that matters. I don't have my son. The parallel to her own life wasn't lost on Victoria. 3 months ago, she'd been exactly where Robert Hayes was now, wealthy and successful and completely alone in the ways that mattered. There's something else, Robert continued. Something I think you should know before you decide whether to help me. What? Robert reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick document bound in legal blue. This is my will, Mrs. Sterling. When I die, everything I own will go to Marcus, my entire estate, valued at approximately $200 million. Victoria felt the room spin. $200 million? My construction company, Hayes Industries, has been one of the most successful firms on the West Coast for 50 years. I never married, never had other children. Everything I built was meant for Marcus, even when I didn't know where he was. Victoria sank back into her chair. Marcus, gentle, selfless Marcus, who gave his coat to a shivering child, was about to inherit a fortune that would make him one of the wealthiest men in America. Does he have any idea? None. As far as Marcus knows, his biological parents died young and poor. The Williamses never told him he'd been given up by choice rather than circumstance. Victoria thought about Marcus in his small apartment, carefully, tending his garden, so proud of the modest salary he earned helping children. How would this knowledge change him? How would sudden, overwhelming wealth affect the man who had taught her that true richness had nothing to do with money? Mr. Hayes, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Is this about guilt? Are you trying to buy forgiveness with money? Robert Hayes looked out the window at the city where his son was living, working, building a life from nothing. Mrs. Sterling, if I could trade every dollar I have for one day with my son when he was 3 years old, I would do it in a heartbeat. This isn't about money. This is about a father who wants to know his child before it's too late. Victoria studied the old man's mistakes and was running out of time to make them right. All right, she said finally. I'll arrange a meeting. But on my terms. Anything. Marcus doesn't learn about the inheritance until after you've talked. If he chooses to have a relationship with you, it should be because he wants to know his father, not because you're rich. Robert Hayes nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. I don't want money to complicate this. Victoria almost laughed at the irony. Money was about to complicate everything, whether Robert wanted it to or not. Marcus Williams, the homeless teacher who had given his coat to a stranger's child, was about to discover that he was heir to a fortune and that the father who had abandoned him had been looking for him for 30 years. Everything was about to change, and Victoria wasn't sure any of them were ready for what came next. Victoria spent the next 3 days in a state of carefully controlled anxiety, planning how to tell Marcus about his father while wrestling with the implications of what she'd learned. $200 million. The number kept cycling through her mind as she watched Marcus work with his students, tend his garden, and live his simple, purposeful life. She arranged to meet Marcus at his apartment on Friday evening, telling him only that she had something important to discuss. Emma was spending the weekend with her father, which gave Victoria the privacy she needed for what was certain to be a life-changing conversation. Marcus greeted her at his door with his usual warm smile, wiping soil from his hands with a dish towel. Perfect timing. I just finished planting the tomato seedlings. Come see. His small garden had been transformed over the past 3 months. What had been a patch of frozen earth in December was now filled with neat rows of vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Marcus had built raised beds from reclaimed wood, installed simple irrigation system, and created something beautiful from nothing, just as he did with his students. Sarah would have loved this, he said, kneeling beside a row of lettuce seedlings. She always said gardens were proof that hope was real. You plant something tiny and trust that it will grow into something wonderful. Victoria watched him work, his hands gentle with the fragile plants, and felt her heart break a little. How do you tell someone that everything they believe about their life is about to change? How do you prepare someone for the kind of upheaval that comes with sudden wealth and the discovery of family they never knew existed? Marcus, we need to talk about something. He looked up at her, immediately alert to the seriousness in her voice. What's wrong? Is Emma okay? Emma's fine. This is about you. About your family. Marcus stood slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. Victoria, I don't have any family. That's what I need to talk to you about. Marcus, someone came to see me this week. Someone who's been looking for you for a very long time. They went inside and sat at Marcus's small kitchen table. Victoria had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, but now that the moment had arrived, all her careful words seemed inadequate. Marcus, your biological father is alive. His name is Robert Hayes, and he's been searching for you for 30 years. Marcus stared at her without speaking for so long that Victoria began to worry he was in shock. Finally, he shook his head slowly. That's impossible. The Williamses told me my birth parents died in an accident when I was a baby. They lied to protect you. Your father gave you up for adoption when you were 3 days old. Your mother had died, and he was 19 and overwhelmed, and made what he now knows was the worst decision of his life. Marcus stood abruptly and walked to the window overlooking his garden. My father abandoned me. Yes, and he's regretted it every day since. Where has he been all these years? If he was looking for me, why didn't he find me before I lost everything? Before Sarah died? Before I ended up on the streets? Victoria heard the pain and anger in Marcus's voice and understood that this conversation was going exactly as badly as she'd feared. He did find you, Marcus. He followed your career from a distance. He knew about your teaching awards, your marriage to Sarah, your life in Evanston. He never approached you because he didn't want to disrupt your happiness. But he was willing to let me live on the streets. He only learned about Sarah's death and your situation 3 years ago. He's been trying to find you ever since. But do you know how hard it is to locate someone who's homeless? You disappeared from the system completely. Marcus turned from the window, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. How did he find me now? The newspaper article about the literacy program. There was a photograph, and he recognized you. What does he want? Victoria took a deep breath. To see you. To apologize. To try to build some kind of relationship before it's too late. Too late for what? Marcus, he's 74 years old. He spent the last 50 years building a successful business, but he never married, never had other children. You're all the family he has. Marcus sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. I can't process this. All my life, I thought my parents died in some tragic accident. The Williamses used to tell me stories about how much my birth parents loved me, how they would have wanted me to be happy and successful. Now you're telling me my father just gave me away? He was 19, Marcus. Scared and alone and probably making the best decision he could with the information he had at the time. The best decision? Marcus's voice rose. Giving away your child is never the best decision. Victoria thought about her own struggles with parenting. How many times she'd made choices that prioritized work over Emma's emotional needs. People make mistakes, Marcus. Even parents. Even good people who love their children. You don't understand, Victoria. Do you know what it's like to grow up wondering why your parents didn't want you? Even with the Williamses loving me, there was always this voice in the back of my mind asking what was wrong with me, what made me unlovable. But now you know the truth. Your father didn't give you away because you were unlovable. He gave you away because he thought you deserved better than what he could provide. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. What's he like? Intelligent. Successful. He reminds me of you, actually. There's something gentle about him. Something thoughtful. And Marcus, he's proud of you. He's followed your career. Knows about the lives you've touched as a teacher. He called you his son with such love in his voice. Does he know about the last 3 years? About me being homeless? Yes, and I think it breaks his heart that he wasn't there to help you when you needed it most. Marcus stood and walked to his bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines of the novels he'd collected over the years. Many of them were books he'd used in his teaching, stories about families and loss and redemption. There's something else, isn't there? He said without turning around. I can hear it in your voice. Something you haven't told me yet. Victoria's heart pounded. Marcus, your father is very wealthy. He owns a construction company called Hayes Industries. So, when he dies, you'll inherit everything, his entire estate. Marcus turned around slowly. How much money are we talking about? Approximately $200 million. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge they both had to cross. Marcus stared at Victoria as though she'd spoken in a foreign language. 200 million? Yes. Marcus sank into his chair, his face pale. I don't want his money, Victoria. That's not really the point. It is the point. Marcus's voice was sharp now, more animated than Victoria had ever seen him. Don't you see? This changes everything. How do I know if he really wants a relationship with me? Or if he's just trying to ease his guilt by leaving me his fortune? How do I know if you're helping me because you care about me, or because you want access to his money? The accusation hit Victoria like a slap. Marcus, that's not fair, isn't it? You're a billionaire businesswoman, and suddenly you're best friends with a homeless man. Now it turns out that homeless man is about to inherit hundreds of millions of dollars. You have to admit, the timing is suspicious. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. You know that's not true. You know why I helped you, because of what you did for Emma, because of the kind of person you are. Do I? Because right now, I don't. Know anything for certain? Marcus stood again, pacing the small space of his kitchen. 3 months ago, I was nobody. Just another invisible homeless person that society stepped over on the sidewalk. Now suddenly I have a father and a fortune, and I'm supposed to just accept that none of this is about money? Marcus, please. No, Victoria. I need you to leave. I need to think about this alone. Will you at least meet with your father? Marcus paused at the window, looking out at his garden where the evening light was fading. I don't know. Right now, I don't know anything except that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. Victoria gathered her purse and coat, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she'd handled this badly. At the door, she turned back. Marcus, for what it's worth, Your father didn't want you to know about the inheritance until after you'd met him. He said he wanted you to know him as a father, not as a wealthy man. But I do know about it now. And that changes everything, doesn't it? Victoria left Marcus alone in his apartment, staring out at the garden that had represented hope and new beginnings just hours before. Now it looked small and fragile in the gathering darkness, and she wondered if she'd just destroyed the most important friendship of her life. The drive home felt endless. At red lights, Victoria found herself gripping the steering wheel and wondering if there was any way to undo what she'd done. She'd been trying to help, but maybe some secrets were meant to stay buried. Maybe some truths caused more harm than good. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Daddy says you look sad in the picture I sent him. Are you okay, Mommy? Victoria realized she had no idea what picture Emma was referring to, but the concern in her daughter's message brought fresh tears to her eyes. In trying to help Marcus navigate the complex emotions of family and forgiveness, had she forgotten the most important lesson he'd taught her? That love wasn't about grand gestures or life-changing revelations, but about simple presence and consistent care? As she pulled into her building's parking garage, Victoria wondered if Marcus would ever forgive her for turning his quiet, purposeful life upside down. And more importantly, she wondered if she'd just lost the person who had taught her what it meant to truly live. The next morning brought no relief. Victoria woke early and called Marcus's apartment, but there was no answer. She drove by his building and saw that his car was gone. A call to Roosevelt Elementary revealed that Marcus had called in sick, the first day he'd missed since starting the job 3 months ago. Victoria spent Saturday in a state of restless anxiety, unable to concentrate on work or enjoy Emma's excited chatter about her weekend plans with David. By Sunday evening, when Emma returned home full of stories about her father's new girlfriend and their trip to the zoo, Victoria realized she needed to take action. "Mommy, you seem worried," Emma said, as they sat down for dinner. "Is everything okay with Marcus?" Victoria looked at her daughter, this wise, perceptive child who had brought Marcus into their lives, and made a decision. "Emma, how would you feel about helping me with something important?" "What kind of help?" "Marcus is going through a difficult time right now. He found out some surprising news about his family, and I think he's feeling confused and maybe a little scared." Emma put down her fork, immediately serious. "What happened?" Victoria chose her words carefully. "He discovered that his father, who he thought had died a long time ago, is actually alive and has been looking for him." "That's wonderful. Why is Marcus sad about that?" "Sometimes when we learn that people we love haven't been completely honest with us, it makes us question everything we thought we knew. Marcus is wondering if the people in his life care about him for who he is or for other reasons." Emma considered this with the gravity that 8-year-olds brought to important matters. "Does Marcus think you don't really care about him?" "I'm afraid he might, but that's silly. You care about Marcus because he saved me, and because he's kind, and because he makes you smile when you talk about the garden program." Victoria felt her throat tighten. "Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly why I care about him. Then we need to show him that. We need to prove that we love him no matter what." "How do you think we should do that?" Emma was quiet for a moment then. Her face lit up with the kind of inspiration that only children possessed. "We should make him dinner. Not fancy restaurant food, but real dinner that we cook ourselves. And we should bring it to his house and eat with him in his garden." Victoria smiled for the first time in days. "That's a perfect idea, Emma." They spent the next hour planning their menu. Marcus's favorite foods based on their months of friendship. Homemade vegetable soup using produce from his own garden, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Simple food made with love, the kind of meal that said, "You matter to us," without needing words. Monday morning, Victoria called Robert Hayes. "Mr. Hayes, I spoke with Marcus. He knows about you now. How did he take it? Victoria chose her words carefully. He's processing a lot of difficult emotions. The knowledge that his adoptive parents weren't completely truthful with him. The realization that you've been watching his life from a distance. The complex feelings about why you gave him up in the first place. Does he want to see me? He hasn't decided yet. But Mr. Hayes, I need to ask you something. If Marcus chooses not to have a relationship with you, will you still leave him the inheritance? Robert Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Sterling, that money was always meant for my son. Whether he forgives me or not, whether he wants to know me or not, he's still my child. The inheritance isn't conditional on his affection. And if he wants nothing to do with the money, then he can give it all away, donate it to charity, use it to fund literacy programs for every child in America. I don't care. I just want him to have choices. I want him to never again have to choose between keeping warm and helping someone else stay warm. Victoria understood then that Robert Hayes' love for his son was genuine, complicated by decades of regret but rooted in the same selfless impulse that had driven Marcus to give his coat to Emma that cold December night. Mr. Hayes, I'm going to ask you to wait a little longer. Let me try to help Marcus work through his feelings. If he decides he wants to meet you, I'll arrange it. But it has to be his choice, made without pressure. Whatever you think is best. Mrs. Sterling, I've waited 30 years. I can wait a little longer if it means doing this right. That evening, Victoria and Emma arrived at Marcus's apartment building carrying grocery bags and a picnic basket. They'd spent the afternoon cooking together, Emma carefully measuring ingredients, while Victoria told her stories about Marcus's teaching, his garden, and the quiet courage he brought to everything he did. Marcus answered his door, looking tired and drawn, but his face softened when he saw Emma. Well, hello there, little hero. What brings you by? We brought dinner, Emma announced, holding up the picnic basket. Mommy and I cooked it ourselves, and we want to eat with you in your garden. Marcus looked at Victoria over Emma's head, his expression unreadable. Emma, that's very sweet, but I'm not really in the mood for company tonight. Please, Marcus. Emma's voice carried the sincere pleading that only children could manage. I missed you this weekend, and Mommy said you were sad. And I know that good food makes people feel better when they're sad. Victoria watched Marcus's face crumble slightly at Emma's words. Whatever anger and confusion he felt toward her, he couldn't resist Emma's uncomplicated love. All right, he said finally, but just for a little while. They set up a makeshift picnic in Marcus's small garden, using an old card table and mismatched chairs. The evening was warm for early April, and the vegetables Marcus had planted were beginning to show their first green shoots. Emma chattered happily about school and her upcoming birthday party, while Victoria and Marcus maintained a careful politeness that masked the tension between them. The soup is delicious, Marcus said, and Victoria could hear him trying to bridge the gap that had opened between them. Emma picked the vegetables from your garden this afternoon, Victoria replied. She said it would make the soup more special if it came from plants you'd grown yourself. She was right. Marcus looked at Emma, who was carefully buttering a piece of bread. You know, Emma, this reminds me of something from a book I used to teach. There's a story about a stone soup where everyone in a village contributes something small to make a feast that feeds everyone. What's stone soup? Emma asked Dot as Marcus began to tell the story. Victoria watched his face transform. The weariness and hurt faded, replaced by the gentle animation he brought to all his teaching. This was who Marcus really was, not the heir to a fortune, not even the homeless man who had given his coat to a child, but simply a person who understood that stories and shared meals and gardens full of growing things were what made life worth living. After dinner, as they cleaned up together, Emma made an announcement that surprised both adults. Marcus, I think you should meet your father. Marcus paused in stacking plates. Why do you say that, sweetheart? Because you taught me that. Heroes help people even when it's hard. And I think your father needs help too. What kind of help? Emma considered this seriously. He needs help not being sad about the mistake he made when you were little. And you need help not being angry about it. Maybe if you help each other, you'll both feel better. Victoria watched Marcus absorb Emma's 8-year-old wisdom, and she saw the moment when his expression shifted from resistance to consideration. You might be right, Emma. You might be very right. The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday at Victoria's office neutral, ground where both men might feel more comfortable. Victoria had offered her conference room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, thinking that the expansive view might help put their personal struggles into perspective. Marcus arrived first, wearing the navy wool coat Emma had picked out for him months earlier. He looked nervous but resolute, carrying a small wrapped package that Victoria suspected was one of his treasured books. She'd learned over their months of friendship that Marcus expressed his feelings through literature, finding in stories the words he couldn't always speak himself. "How are you feeling?" Victoria asked as they waited in her office. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "I keep thinking about all the questions I want to ask him, all the things I need to understand. But mostly I keep wondering if I'll be able to look at him and not see the 19-year-old who gave me away." He's not 19 anymore, Marcus. He's an old man who spent most of his life regretting a decision he made when he was barely more than a child himself. I know that intellectually, but emotions don't always follow logic, do they? Before Victoria could respond, Jennifer knocked on the door. "Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Hayes is here." Victoria felt her pulse quicken. "Send him in." Robert Hayes entered the office with the careful dignity of someone trying to mask overwhelming anxiety. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, but his hands trembled slightly as he set down his briefcase. His eyes immediately found Marcus, and Victoria watched as 30 years of longing and regret passed across his face. "Hello, son," he said quietly. Marcus stood slowly, and for a moment, the two men simply looked at each other across the space of Victoria's office. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same intelligent eyes, the same set to their shoulders, the same thoughtful expression. They were clearly father and son, separated by decades of missed opportunities and misunderstanding. "Mr. Hayes," Marcus said formally, "please call me Robert." Or, he paused, vulnerability cracking his composed exterior, "I don't have the right to ask you to call me anything more than that, do I?" Victoria moved toward the door. "I'll leave you two alone." "No," Marcus said quickly. "Please stay, Victoria. I think I need you here." She nodded and settled into a chair near the window, close enough to offer support, but far enough away to give them privacy for their conversation. Robert cleared his throat. "Marcus, I know this must be overwhelming. I know you have questions, and I know you probably hate me. You have every right to hate me." "I don't hate you," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. "I don't know you well enough to hate you, but I am angry and confused, and I need to understand why. Why I gave you up. Why you gave me up. Why you never tried to contact me. Why you watched my life from a distance, but never tried to be part of it. Why you only came forward now, when I've already lived 62 years without you." Robert sat heavily in the chair across from Marcus, suddenly looking every one of his 74 years. "Those are all fair questions, and I'll try to answer them as honestly as I can." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a worn photograph. The same one he'd shown Victoria, of himself as a young man with Linda and baby Marcus. "This was taken 3 days before I gave you up for adoption. Your mother had been dead for 6 months, and I was barely surviving. I was working 2 jobs, trying to finish college, living in a studio apartment that was barely bigger than a closet. You were crying all the time, colic, the doctor said, and I didn't know how to help you." Marcus took the photograph with hands that weren't quite steady. "Tell me about her." "About my mother." Robert's face softened. Linda was the most beautiful person I'd ever met. Not just physically, though she was stunning. She was kind and funny, and she saw good in everyone. She would have been an amazing mother. She was an amazing mother, even for those few months we had with you. How did she die? Car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. Robert's voice was barely above a whisper. She was coming home from the grocery store. She'd bought ingredients to make you homemade baby food because she was convinced the jarred stuff wasn't good enough for you. Marcus stared at the photograph, and Victoria could see him trying to imagine the parents he'd never known. The life that might have been. After Linda died, I fell apart, Robert continued. I was 19 years old, alone, and responsible for a baby I had no idea how to care for. My own father was no help. He disowned me when Linda got pregnant, said I'd brought shame on the family name. I was exhausted, broke, and desperate. So you gave me away. I told myself I was doing what was best for you. The adoption agency showed me profiles of families who wanted children stable, loving couples with good jobs and nice homes. The Williamses seemed perfect. He was a teacher. She was a nurse. They'd been trying to have children for years. I convinced myself that they could give you everything I couldn't. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the photograph. Did you ever think about changing your mind? Every day. For weeks after I signed the papers, I would drive by the Williams's house, hoping to catch a glimpse of you. I must have picked up the phone 100 times to call the agency and ask for you back. Why didn't you? Robert's voice broke. Because I was a coward. Because I was terrified that I would fail you the way I felt I'd already failed your mother. Because I thought you were better off without me. And later? When you were older, more established. By then, years had passed. The Williamses had given you their name, their love, their life. You were thriving. I kept track of you through school records, newspaper articles about your teaching. You seemed happy, and I didn't want to disrupt that by showing up and explaining that everything you'd been told about your origins was a lie. Marcus set the photograph on the table between them. They told me you and my mother died in an accident, that you were young and in love and had planned to raise me together. I asked them to tell you that. I thought it would be easier for you to believe your parents had died than to know you'd been abandoned. Easier for me, or easier for you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Robert met his son's gaze directly. Easier for me, he admitted. I was still being a coward. Even then, I wanted you to remember me, to remember the idea of me as someone who had loved you, not someone who had given you away. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city spread below them. Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself as he processed 30 years of deception. You said you followed my career, Marcus said without turning around. What did you know about my life? I knew you became a teacher like your adoptive father. I knew you won awards for excellence in education, 3 different years. I knew you married Sarah in 1987, and that she was a social worker who shared your passion for helping children. I knew you lived in Evanston in a house with a big oak tree in the front yard. Marcus turned around, surprise flickering across his face. You knew about the oak tree? I drove by your house once about 10 years ago. I couldn't help myself. I just wanted to see where my son lived, to know that you were happy. You were in the front yard raking leaves, and Sarah was sitting on the porch reading a book. You looked content, peaceful. I sat in my car across the street for maybe 5 minutes, just watching you, and then I drove away. You were that close, and I didn't have the courage. I told myself I was protecting your happiness, but the truth is, I was protecting myself from the possibility that you might reject me. Marcus moved back to his chair, his expression thoughtful. When did you find out about Sarah's death? Robert's composure finally cracked completely. 3 years ago. I hired an investigator to do a wellness check. I just wanted to make sure you were okay as you got older. Instead, I learned that Sarah had died of cancer 2 years earlier, that you'd lost your house to medical bills, that you were living on the streets. And you didn't try to find me then? I tried everything. Private investigators, social workers, police contacts. Do you know how hard it is to find someone who doesn't want to be found? Someone who's fallen through the cracks of society? Marcus was quiet for a moment. I didn't want to be found. After Sarah died, after I lost everything, I just wanted to disappear. I was ashamed, broken. I didn't want anyone from my old life to see what I'd become. But I should have tried harder. I should have. Stop. Marcus held up his hand. Stop apologizing and tell me what you want now. Why did you come forward when you saw that newspaper article? What do you hope to get from this meeting? Robert Hayes looked at his son with eyes that held 5 decades of regret and longing. I want to know you, Marcus. I want to hear about your life, not the public achievements I could read about in newspapers, but the real things. What made you laugh? What broke your heart? What you dreamed about when you were teaching those thousands of students? I want to know what Sarah was like when she made you coffee in the morning, and what books you read together, and whether you ever thought about the parents you believed had died. Marcus sat back down, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. And then what? You get to know me for a few months or years before you die, and then I inherit your fortune and spend the rest of my life wondering if you really cared about me or if you just felt guilty. The money isn't about guilt, Marcus. Then what is it about? Robert reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. It's about dreams deferred. It's about all the things I wanted to give you when you were 3 days old, and 5 years old, and 16, and 30. It's about wanting to pay for your college education and your wedding and your first house. It's about wanting to help you. And Sarah, when she got sick, wanting to make sure you never had to choose between keeping your home and trying to save the woman you loved. Marcus's composure cracked at the mention of Sarah. Don't talk about her like you knew her. I didn't know her, but I loved her because she loved you. I used to read the social work awards she won, the articles about programs she created for at-risk families. I could see in her work the same compassion that made you an extraordinary teacher. I grieved for her death, Marcus, even though I'd never met her. I grieved for your loss. Victoria watched as Marcus struggled with emotions too complex for simple anger or forgiveness. The room felt charged with decades of missed connections and misunderstood intentions. Victoria told you about the inheritance, Robert continued. $200 million. I need you to understand that money was never meant to be a gift or an apology. It was meant to be what any father leaves his son, the fruits of a lifetime of work. A security to pursue your dreams without worrying about survival. But I don't need your money now. I have a job I love, a home, a purpose. I'm not the desperate 19-year-old you were, and I'm not the broken man who lost everything to medical bills. I've rebuilt my life. I know you have, and I'm proud of you for that. But Marcus, this money isn't about what you need. It's about what you could do. Imagine the literacy programs you could fund, the scholarships you could create, the children you could help. You've already shown what you can accomplish with limited resource. As imagine what you could do with unlimited ones. Marcus stood again, this time moving to the small package he'd brought with him. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. This was the first book I ever taught, he said, running his fingers over the familiar cover. I must have read it with 1,000 students over the years. Do you know why I chose it? Robert shook his head. Because it's about a father who does the right thing even when it's hard, even when everyone around him thinks he's wrong. Atticus Finch protects people who can't protect themselves, and he teaches his children that real courage isn't a man with a gun. It's when you know you're Look before you begin, but you begin anyway and see it through. Marcus looked directly at his father. I spent my whole career teaching kids about heroes, about people who stand up for what's right even when it costs them something. But I also taught them about the importance of forgiveness, about understanding that people are complex and flawed and capable of both terrible mistakes and profound love. What are you saying? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria could see him weighing decades of hurt against the possibility of connection. I'm saying that I understand why you made the choices you did. I don't agree with them, and I wish things had been different, but I understand them. Robert's eyes filled with tears. Does that mean? It means I'm willing to try, to get to know each other, to build some kind of relationship. But I need you to understand something. I don't want your money because you feel guilty. I don't want a relationship with you because you're wealthy. If we're going to do this, it has to be because we genuinely care about each other as people. That's all I've ever wanted, Marcus. The money, keep it. Give it away. Use it however you see fit. All I want is the chance to know my son. Victoria watched as Marcus studied his father's face, searching for sincerity, for the truth beneath 30 years of complicated emotions. Finally, Marcus extended his hand. Hello, Robert. I'm Marcus. It's nice to meet you. Robert took his son's hand, and Victoria could see 30 years of grief and longing pass between them in that simple gesture. Hello, Marcus. I'm your father, and I've been looking forward to meeting you for my entire adult life. They sat back down, the formal barriers between them beginning to dissolve. Marcus opened the copy of To Kill a Mockingbird and showed Robert passages he'd marked over the years. Quotes he'd shared with students about courage and compassion and doing the right thing even when it was difficult. I want to show you something, Robert said, reaching for his briefcase again. This time, he pulled out a different folder. This one filled with newspaper clippings, photographs, and documents. I told you, I followed your career from a distance. This is my collection of everything I could find about your life. Marcus stared at the thick folder. Everything? Graduation. Programs from the high school where you taught. Articles about innovative teaching methods you pioneered. Letters to the editor from former students, thanking you for changing their lives. Photos from school events where you were honored for your dedication. Robert's voice grew soft. I have a picture of you and Sarah at your wedding that I found in the society pages of the local paper. You both looked so happy. Marcus took the folder with shaking hands, flipping through decades of documentation. Here was his life, as seen through a father's eyes. Every achievement celebrated, every milestone noted, every moment of pride carefully preserved. You kept all of this? I kept everything I could find. It was the only way I had to be part of your life. Victoria watched as Marcus absorbed this evidence of his father's love, flawed and distant, but genuine nonetheless. She thought about her own relationship with Emma, how she'd nearly made the same mistake of loving from a distance, of prioritizing everything except the simple act of being present. There's something I need to tell you, Marcus said suddenly, about the night Victoria and I met, about what really happened. He told his father the whole story, Emma wandering away from the hotel, the bitter cold, the decision to give his coat to a shivering child. As he spoke, Victoria could see Robert's face transform with pride and wonder. You gave your only protection to a stranger's child, Robert said when Marcus finished. Yes, even though it could have killed you. Yes, Robert looked at Victoria, then back at his son. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And it tells me everything I need to know about the man you've become. Marcus seemed surprised by the intensity of his father's reaction. It wasn't heroic. It was just the right thing to do. Marcus, do you understand what you just told me? You've spent your entire life giving pieces of yourself to people who needed help. 35 years of teaching students who needed guidance. 3 years of surviving on the streets with dignity and grace. And then when you finally had a chance to rebuild your life, you gave your coat to a child you'd never met. Because she was cold. Robert's voice broke with emotion. You became the man I hoped you would become. Despite everything that happened to you, despite all the ways I failed you, you became someone who chooses love over safety, compassion over self-preservation. You became a hero. Marcus looked down at the book in his hands, then back at his father. I became a teacher. That's all I ever wanted to be. The best teachers are heroes, Marcus. They shape the future by believing in children who don't yet believe in themselves. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she watched this reunion, complicated and imperfect, but filled with the kind of love that transcends mistakes and regrets. She thought about Emma's presentation about heroes, about her daughters. Simple wisdom that real heroes were just people who helped other people when they needed it. Robert, Marcus said quietly, I'd like you to meet someone important to me. Someone who helped me understand what family really means. Oh? Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile Victoria had seen from him since she told him about his father. Her name is Emma, and she's 8 years old, and she's the one who taught me that heroes come in all forms. She's also the reason I'm able to sit here with you today instead of freezing to death in some shelter. I'd be honored to meet her, and I'd like you to see the literacy program. Meet some of the children we're working with. I think you'd like them. They remind me of myself at that age. Smart, curious, a little lost, but full of potential. Robert nodded eagerly. I'd love that. Marcus, I want to be part of your life in whatever way you'll let me. Not as someone trying to buy forgiveness, but as a father who's grateful for a second chance. Marcus closed the book and looked at his father with clear eyes. Then let's start. With dinner. Victoria, would you and Emma join us? I think it's time we all sat down together and shared a meal. Victoria wiped her tears and smiled. I think Emma would love that. She's been wanting to tell you about her presentation on heroes. She's very proud of you, you know? I'm proud of her. She saved my life that night, just as much as I helped her. As they prepared to leave Victoria's office, Marcus turned back. To his father, Robert, I'm glad you found me. I'm glad you had the courage to reach out, even after all these years. I'm glad you had the courage to forgive an old man's mistakes. We all make mistakes, Marcus said, echoing the wisdom Victoria had heard him share with his students. The important thing is what we do to make them right. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the backyard of Marcus's new house, a modest Victorian. In Lincoln Park, with the garden he'd always dreamed of, watching Emma help her surrogate grandfather plant sunflowers. The summer sun was warm on her shoulders, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter and the distant hum of the city they all called home. Marcus had used a small portion of his inheritance to buy the house, but the bulk of the money had gone towards something far more ambitious: the Williams Hayes Foundation for Educational Excellence, a nationwide network of literacy programs that combined academic instruction with emotional support for at-risk children. Robert served as chairman of the board, Marcus as executive director, and Victoria as a founding member who helped navigate the complex world of educational policy and nonprofit management. Mommy, look how tall the sunflowers are going to be, Emma called out, her hands covered in soil as she carefully patted earth around a seedling. Marcus says they'll be taller than me by the end of summer. They'll be taller than all of us. Marcus replied, grinning as he showed Emma how to space the seeds properly. Sunflowers always reach for the light, just like children reach for knowledge when someone gives them the chance. Robert watched his son with undisguised pride, still marveling at the way Marcus could turn any moment into a teaching opportunity. Over the past 6 months, they built a relationship that was tender and careful, but genuine, two men learning to be father and son decades later than they should have, but grateful for the chance nonetheless. Victoria, could you help me with the lemonade? Robert asked, gesturing toward the kitchen. She followed him inside, knowing he wanted to talk privately. "How are you doing with all this?" she asked as they filled glasses with ice. "Better than I ever imagined possible," Robert replied. "I know we'll never get back the years we lost, but watching him with Emma, seeing the work he's doing with the foundation, I feel like I understand who my son became despite my failures, not because of them." Through the kitchen window, they could see Marcus and Emma working side by side, the 8-year-old chattering away while the 63-year-old listened with the patience that had made him a beloved teacher. The scene was so natural, so warm, that it was hard to believe they'd known each other for less than a year. "He's changed my life as much as Emma's," Victoria said softly. "Before I met Marcus, I thought success meant building walls high enough to protect yourself from disappointment. He taught me that real success means tearing those walls down and letting people in, even when it's scary." "And Emma? How is she adjusting to having a grandfather who appeared out of nowhere?" Victoria laughed. "You know Emma, she accepted you immediately because Marcus vouched for you. And now she acts like you've always been part of the family. Last week, she told David that she has the best grandfather in the world because you read her stories and help her plant flowers and teach her about birds." Robert's eyes grew misty. "I never thought I'd have the chance to be a grandfather. It's the most wonderful surprise of my old age." They carried the lemonade outside to find Marcus and Emma examining a caterpillar they discovered on one of the tomato plants. Marcus was explaining the process of metamorphosis while Emma listened with rapt attention, asking the kind of questions that showed she was really thinking about what she was learning. "It's kind of like you and Robert, isn't it?" Emma said suddenly, looking up at Marcus with the kind of insight that still amazed the adults in her life. "You were both different people before you found each other, and now you're becoming something new." Marcus glanced at his father, then back at Emma. "That's very wise, sweetheart." "Yes, I think we're both becoming better versions of ourselves because we found each other. Like the ugly duckling becoming a swan, exactly like that." They sat around the picnic table Marcus had built from reclaimed wood, sharing lemonade and homemade cookies while planning the foundation's next expansion. 3 more cities had requested programs, and there was talk of partnering with libraries and community centers to reach even more children. "I have some news," Victoria announced as they discussed the logistics of hiring more teachers. "Sterling Enterprises has decided to make the foundation our primary charitable focus. We're committing $50 million over the next 5 years to support expansion." Marcus nearly choked on his lemonade. $50 million. The board was unanimous. They've seen the results from the pilot programs, the test score improvements, the testimonials from teachers and families. More importantly, they've seen how this work aligns with our core values as a company. "Victoria, that's incredible. With that kind of funding, we could reach thousands more children." Robert smiled at his son's excitement. "I think your mother would be proud of what you're building, Marcus. She always believed in the power of education to change lives." Emma had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up with the seriousness she brought to important matters. "I want to help too. When I grow up, I want to work for the foundation and teach kids like Marcus taught me." "What did Marcus teach you?" Robert asked. "That everyone has a story worth telling, and everyone deserves someone who believes in them, and that heroes aren't just in books. They're all around us, helping people and making the world better." Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotion as she listened to her daughter. Emma had grown so much over the past year, becoming more confident and articulate, but also more compassionate and thoughtful. Having Marcus and Robert in their lives had given her something Victoria couldn't provide alone, a sense of extended family, of being part of something larger than herself. As the afternoon wore on, they worked together in the garden, weeding and watering and planning what to plant in the fall. Emma helped Robert stake tomato plants while Marcus showed Victoria how to identify the different herbs he'd grown from seed. It was the kind of simple, peaceful afternoon that Victoria had once thought was a luxury she couldn't afford, but now understood was essential to a life worth living. "I have something for you," Marcus said to Robert as they finished their work. He disappeared into the house and returned with a small wrapped package. Robert opened it carefully to reveal a leather-bound photo album. The first page contained the wedding photo of Marcus and Sarah that Robert had treasured for so many years. But now it was surrounded by dozens of other images, Marcus with his students, Sarah at her social work award ceremonies, the two of them in their garden, at holiday gatherings, on vacation. "I found these in storage when I was packing up my old life," Marcus explained. "I thought you might like to see the moments you missed, to understand what my life with Sarah was really like." Robert turned the pages slowly, his eyes drinking in the images of his son's happiness. "She was beautiful, Marcus. You both look so content together. We were. For 25 years, we were happier than I ever thought possible. And I hope she would have liked you. I would have loved her because she loved you." Victoria watched this exchange with wonder, marveling at how love could transcend decades of separation and misunderstanding. Marcus and Robert were rebuilding not just their relationship, but their entire understanding of family and forgiveness. Emma climbed into Robert's lap, looking at the photos with him. "Tell me about Aunt Sarah," she said, using the name she'd given Marcus's late wife, despite never having met her. "Well," Robert said, "according to these pictures, Aunt Sarah had the most beautiful smile, and she loved flowers almost as much as your Marcus does. And see this photo? She's reading to a group of children at what looks like a library. She cared about kids just like Marcus does. I think she would have liked our foundation," Emma said confidently. "She would have wanted to help kids learn to read." "I think you're absolutely right," Marcus said, settling beside them on the bench. "Sarah always said that education was the most powerful weapon against poverty and despair. She would have loved what we're building." The sun was beginning to set, painting the garden in golden light that made everything look soft and precious. Victoria felt a deep sense of contentment as she watched her chosen family, because that's what they'd become. She realized a family created not by blood or marriage, but by choice and love and shared purpose. "I need to tell you all something," she said, her voice catching slightly with emotion. "This past year has been the best year of my life. Not because of any business success or financial achievement, but because I learned what really matters. I learned it from a man who gave his coat to a stranger's child, and from a little girl who saw heroes everywhere, and from an old man who never stopped believing in second chances." Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand. "Victoria, you saved my life that night. Not just by getting me warm and fed, but by seeing me as someone worth saving. You gave me back my dignity and my purpose." "You saved mine too," she replied. "I was drowning in work and ambition, missing out on my daughter's childhood, building walls instead of bridges. You taught me that the richest life isn't about accumulating wealth, it's about accumulating moments like this one." Emma looked around at the three adults who had become her world. "Are we always going to be together? Like a real family?" "We are a real family, sweetheart," Marcus said gently. "Not the kind that's related by birth, but the kind that's related by choice. And yes, we'll always be together in the ways that matter most." Robert nodded, his arm tightening around Emma. "Families aren't just about sharing the same blood, little one. They're about sharing the same love, the same commitment to taking care of each other. And we'll always take care of each other." As darkness fell, they moved inside to Marcus's cozy living room, where the walls were lined with books and the mantel displayed photos of all the children who had been touched by the foundation's work. Emma curled up between Marcus and Robert on the sofa while Victoria made hot chocolate in the kitchen, listening to the murmur of their voices as Marcus read from one of Emma's favorite books. When she returned with steaming mugs, She found them deep in discussion about the foundation's next project, a mobile literacy unit that could bring books and teachers directly to underserved communities. It could be like a bookmobile, but with actual classroom space, Emma was explaining, with the enthusiasm of someone who believed anything was possible. And maybe it could have a garden on the roof so kids could learn about growing things too. A rooftop garden on a bus? Robert asked, clearly delighted by his surrogate granddaughter's imagination. Why not? Marcus says gardens teach patience and hope. Kids need to learn those things too. Victoria settled into her chair, watching this conversation unfold with the kind of deep satisfaction she'd never found in any boardroom. This was what success really looked like, not profit margins or acquisition deals, but the sight of people you loved dreaming together about ways to make the world better. Later, as they prepared to leave, Emma hugged Marcus and Robert with the fierce affection of a child who knew she was cherished. "I love you both," she said simply, and Victoria saw tears in both men's eyes. "We love you too, little hero," Marcus replied. "More than you could possibly know." In the car driving home, Emma was unusually quiet, processing the day in the way children do when they've experienced something important. "Mommy," she said finally. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Marcus's wife Sarah can see us? Do you think she knows how happy he is now?" Victoria considered this carefully. "I don't know for sure, Emma, but I like to think that people who love us never really leave us completely. They live on in the good things we do, in the love we share with others. I think she's proud of him, and I think she's proud of us for taking care of him." Victoria felt tears blur her vision as she realized that Emma, at 8 years old, understood something profound about love and loss and the way families could heal each other across time and grief. "I think you're right, sweetheart. I think she's very proud of all of us." As they pulled into their building's parking garage, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she'd been a different person, successful but hollow, wealthy but poor in the ways that mattered most. Now she was still successful, still wealthy, but she was also something more important. She was loved, and she knew how to love in return. The threadbare coat Marcus had given Emma that cold December night hung in their hall closet now, carefully preserved as a reminder of the moment their lives had changed forever. But Victoria understood that the real gift hadn't been the coat. It had been the recognition that true wealth came not from what you accumulated, but from what you were willing to give away. In the elevator, riding up to their penthouse, Emma leaned against her mother's side with the contentment of a child who knew herself to be safe and cherished. "Mommy?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you're not too busy anymore." Victoria kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the scent of sunshine and soil and possibility. "Me too, sweetheart, me too." Outside their windows, Chicago sparkled in the night, full of stories and struggles and small acts of kindness that could change everything. And in a modest house across the city, a man who had once been invisible was reading by lamplight, preparing lessons for children who needed to believe in their own potential, surrounded by the love of a family he'd found in the most unexpected place. Sometimes the people with the least give the most. Sometimes a single moment of kindness can change everything. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that moment of kindness becomes the foundation for a lifetime of love. Robert turned the pages slowly, his eyes drinking in the images of his son's happiness. "She was beautiful, Marcus. You both look so content together." "We were. For 25 years, we were happier than I ever thought possible. And I hope she would have liked you. I would have loved her because she loved you." Victoria watched this exchange with wonder, marveling at how love could transcend decades of separation and misunderstanding. Marcus and Robert were rebuilding not just their relationship, but their entire understanding of family and forgiveness. Emma climbed into Robert's lap, looking at the photos with him. "Tell me about Aunt Sarah," she said, using the name she'd given Marcus's late wife despite never having met her. "Well," Robert said, "according to these pictures, Aunt Sarah had the most beautiful smile, and she loved flowers almost as much as your Marcus does. And see this photo? She's reading to a group of children at what looks like a library. She cared about kids just like Marcus does." "I think she would have liked our foundation," Emma said confidently. "She would have wanted to help kids learn to read." "I think you're absolutely right," Marcus said, settling beside them on the bench. "Sarah always said that education was the most powerful weapon against poverty and despair. She would have loved what we're building." The sun was beginning to set, painting the garden in golden light that made everything look soft and precious. Victoria felt a deep sense of contentment as she watched her chosen family, because that's what they'd become. She realized a family created not by blood or marriage, but by choice and love and shared purpose. "I need to tell you all something," she said, her voice catching slightly with emotion. "This past year has been the best year of my life. Not because of any business success or financial achievement, but because I learned what really matters. I learned it from a man who gave his coat to a stranger's child, and from a little girl who saw heroes everywhere, and from an old man who never stopped believing in second chances." Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand. "Victoria, you saved my life that night. Not just by getting me warm and fed, but by seeing me as someone worth saving. You gave me back my dignity and my purpose." "You saved mine too," she replied. "I was drowning in work and ambition, missing out on my daughter's childhood, building walls instead of bridges. You taught me that the richest life isn't about accumulating wealth, it's about accumulating moments like this one." Emma looked around at the three adults who had become her world. "Are we always going to be together? Like a real family?" "We are a real family, sweetheart," Marcus said gently. "Not the kind that's related by birth, but the kind that's related by choice. And yes, we'll always be together in the ways that matter most." Robert nodded, his arm tightening around Emma. "Families aren't just about sharing the same blood, little one. They're about sharing the same love, the same commitment to taking care of each other. And we'll always take care of each other." As darkness fell, they moved inside to Marcus's cozy living room, where the walls were lined with books and the mantel displayed photos of all the children who had been touched by the foundation's work. Emma curled up between Marcus and Robert on the sofa while Victoria made hot chocolate in the kitchen, listening to the murmur of their voices as Marcus read from one of Emma's favorite books. When she returned with steaming mugs, she found them deep in discussion about the Foundation's next project, a mobile literacy unit that could bring books and teachers directly to underserved communities. "It could be like a bookmobile, but with actual classroom space," Emma was explaining, with the enthusiasm of someone who believed anything was possible. "And maybe it could have a garden on the roof so kids could learn about growing things too." "A rooftop garden on a bus?" Robert asked, clearly delighted by his surrogate granddaughter's imagination. "Why not? Marcus says gardens teach patience and hope. Kids need to learn those things too." Victoria settled into her chair, watching this conversation unfold with the kind of deep satisfaction she'd never found in any boardroom. This was what success really looked like, not profit margins or acquisition deals, but the sight of people you loved dreaming together about ways to make the world better. Later, as they prepared to leave, Emma hugged Marcus and Robert with the fierce affection of a child who knew she was cherished. "I love you both," she said simply, and Victoria saw tears in both men's eyes. "We love you too, little hero," Marcus replied. "More than you could possibly know." In the car driving home, Emma was unusually quiet, processing the day in the way children do when they've experienced something important. "Mommy," she said finally. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Marcus's wife Sarah can see us? Do you think she knows how happy he is now?" Victoria considered this carefully. "I don't know for sure, Emma, but I like to think that people who love us never really leave us completely. They live on in the good things we do, in the love we share with others. I think she's proud of him, and I think she's proud of us for taking care of him." Victoria felt tears blur her vision as she realized that Emma, at 8 years old, understood something profound about love and loss and the way families could heal each other across time and grief. "I think you're right, sweetheart. I think she's very proud of all of us." As they pulled into their building's parking garage, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she'd been a different person, successful but hollow, wealthy but poor in the ways that mattered most. Now she was still successful, still wealthy, but she was also something more important. She was loved, and she knew how to love in return. The threadbare coat Marcus had given Emma that cold December night hung in their hall closet now, carefully preserved as a reminder of the moment their lives had changed forever. But Victoria understood that the real gift hadn't been the coat. It had been the recognition that true wealth came not from what you accumulated, but from what you were willing to give away. In the elevator, riding up to their penthouse, Emma leaned against her mother's side with the contentment of a child who knew herself to be safe and cherished. "Mommy?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you're not too busy anymore." Victoria kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the scent of sunshine and soil and possibility. "Me too, sweetheart, me too." Outside their windows, Chicago sparkled in the night, full of stories and struggles and small acts of kindness that could change everything. And in a modest house across the city, a man who had once been invisible was reading by lamplight, preparing lessons for children who needed to believe in their own potential, surrounded by the love of a family he'd found in the most unexpected place. Sometimes the people with the least give the most. Sometimes a single moment of kindness can change everything. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that moment of kindness becomes the foundation for a lifetime of love. Robert turned the pages slowly, his eyes drinking in the images of his son's happiness. "She was beautiful, Marcus. You both look so content together. We were. For 25 years, we were happier than I ever thought possible. And I hope she would have liked you. I would have loved her because she loved you." Victoria watched this exchange with wonder, marveling at how love could transcend decades of separation and misunderstanding. Marcus and Robert were rebuilding not just their relationship, but their entire understanding of family and forgiveness. Emma climbed into Robert's lap, looking at the photos with him. "Tell me about Aunt Sarah," she said, using the name she'd given Marcus's late wife, despite never having met her. "Well," Robert said, "according to these pictures, Aunt Sarah had the most beautiful smile, and she loved flowers almost as much as your Marcus does. And see this photo? She's reading to a group of children at what looks like a library. She cared about kids just like Marcus does." "I think she would have liked our foundation," Emma said confidently. "She would have wanted to help kids learn to read." "I think you're absolutely right," Marcus said, settling beside them on the bench. "Sarah always said that education was the most powerful weapon against poverty and despair. She would have loved what we're building." The sun was beginning to set, painting the garden in golden light that made everything look soft and precious. Victoria felt a deep sense of contentment as she watched her chosen family, because that's what they'd become. She realized a family created not by blood or marriage, but by choice and love and shared purpose. "I need to tell you all something," she said, her voice catching slightly with emotion. "This past year has been the best year of my life. Not because of any business success or financial achievement, but because I learned what really matters. I learned it from a man who gave his coat to a stranger's child, and from a little girl who saw heroes everywhere, and from an old man who never stopped believing in second chances." Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand. "Victoria, you saved my life that night. Not just by getting me warm and fed, but by seeing me as someone worth saving. You gave me back my dignity and my purpose. You saved mine too, she replied. I was drowning in work and ambition, missing out on my daughter's childhood, building walls instead of bridges. You taught me that the richest life isn't about accumulating wealth. It's about accumulating moments like this one. Emma looked around at the three adults who had become her world. Are we always going to be together? Like a real family? We are a real family, sweetheart, Marcus said gently. Not the kind that's related by birth, but the kind that's related by choice. And yes, we'll always be together in the ways that matter most. Robert nodded, his arm tightening around Emma. Families aren't just about sharing the same blood, little one. They're about sharing the same love, the same commitment to taking care of each other. And we'll always take care of each other. As darkness fell, they moved inside to Marcus's cozy living room, where the walls were lined with books and the mantel displayed photos of all the children who had been touched by the foundation's work. Emma curled up between Marcus and Robert on the sofa while Victoria made hot chocolate in the kitchen, listening to the murmur of their voices as Marcus read from one of Emma's favorite books. When she returned with steaming mugs, she found them deep in discussion about the Foundation's next project, a mobile literacy unit that could bring books and teachers directly to underserved communities. It could be like a book mobile, but with actual classroom space, Emma was explaining, with the enthusiasm of someone who believed anything was possible. And maybe it could have a garden on the roof, so kids could learn about growing things too. A rooftop garden on a bus? Robert asked, clearly delighted by his surrogate granddaughter's imagination. Why not? Marcus says gardens teach patience and hope. Kids need to learn those things too. Victoria settled into her chair, watching this conversation unfold with the kind of deep satisfaction she'd never found in any boardroom. This was what success really looked like, not profit margins or acquisition deals, but the sight of people you loved dreaming together about ways to make the world better. Later, as they prepared to leave, Emma hugged Marcus and Robert with the fierce affection of a child who knew she was cherished. I love you both, she said simply, and Victoria saw tears in both men's eyes. We love you too, little hero, Marcus replied. More than you could possibly know. In the car driving home, Emma was unusually quiet, processing the day in the way children do when they've experienced something important. Mommy, she said finally. Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Marcus's wife Sarah can see us? Do you think she knows how happy he is now? Victoria considered this carefully. I don't know for sure, Emma, but I like to think that people who love us never really leave us completely. They live on in the good things we do, in the love we share with others. I think she's proud of him, and I think she's proud of us for taking care of him. Victoria felt tears blur her vision as she realized that Emma, at 8 years old, understood something profound about love and loss and the way families could heal each other across time and grief. I think you're right, sweetheart. I think she's very proud of all of us. As they pulled into their building's parking garage, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she'd been a different person, successful but hollow, wealthy but poor in the ways that mattered most. Now she was still successful, still wealthy, but she was also something more important. She was loved, and she knew how to love in return. The threadbare coat Marcus had given Emma that cold December night hung in their hall closet now, carefully, preserved as a reminder of the moment their lives had changed forever. But Victoria understood that the real gift hadn't been the coat. It had been the recognition that true wealth came not from what you accumulated, but from what you were willing to give away. In the elevator, riding up to their penthouse, Emma leaned against her mother's side with the contentment of a child who knew herself to be safe and cherished. Mommy? Yes. I'm glad you're not too busy anymore. Victoria kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the scent of sunshine and soil and possibility. Me too, sweetheart, me too. Outside their windows, Chicago sparkled in the night, full of stories and struggles and small acts of kindness that could change everything. And in a modest house across the city, a man who had once been invisible was reading by lamplight, preparing lessons for children who needed to believe in their own potential, surrounded by the love of a family he'd found in the most unexpected place. Sometimes the people with the least give the most. Sometimes a single moment of kindness can change everything. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that moment of kindness becomes the foundation for a lifetime of love.